On Christmas morning, my daughter-in-law stood up from my dining room table, picked up the folder containing my late wife's estate documents, and threw it into the fireplace. Then she looked at me across the remains of the holiday breakfast and said, "Sign the new ones, old man, or you will spend the rest of your holidays alone." My son sat beside her and stared at his plate. I watched Martha's papers curl and blacken in the flames. I did not yell, I did not beg. I pushed my chair back, walked to the kitchen, and dialed my brother. "Slade," I said when he picked up. It happened. He did not ask me to explain. We had gone over every possibility 6 weeks earlier, sitting at this same kitchen table after everyone else had gone home, when he had looked me in the eye and said, "One day they are going to cross a line, Alistair. And when they do, you call me." "How bad?" he asked. "She burned Martha's papers." A long silence, then execute everything. I hung up, I straightened my collar. I walked back into the dining room and sat back down. Before I continue, drop a comment and let me know where you are watching from. And if you have ever been disrespected in your own home by someone you were trying to help, hit that like button and subscribe. This channel exists because of people who understand what that feels like. I am 71 years old. I built a life with my hands and my mind, and for a very long time I made the mistake of believing that blood was enough of a reason to keep giving. Let me tell you how I got here. My wife Martha passed 4 years ago, pancreatic cancer, 6 weeks from diagnosis to the end. The house we had shared for 38 years, a colonial on 3 acres outside of Asheville, North Carolina, went quiet in a way I had never experienced and could never have prepared for. My son Colin came to the funeral with his wife Daphne, held my hand for about 20 minutes, and then began asking about the will before we had gotten home from the cemetery. I told myself he was grieving. Grief makes people say strange things. I told myself that for 4 years. Daphne was the kind of woman who assessed a room before she entered it. Not in the casual way people do, she did it the way a contractor does, pricing out the load-bearing walls and the copper plumbing. From the first Christmas she spent in this house, I caught her running her fingers along the baseboards, peering into closets, opening cabinet doors. I thought she was curious. I now understand she was inventorying. Colin was 40 years old and had not held a steady job since his mid-30s. He had a history of bad ideas executed with great confidence, a food truck that lasted 9 months, a drop-shipping business that dissolved owing 3 vendors, and most recently a consulting firm that appeared to have no clients but a very nice LinkedIn page. I had helped him more times than I could count without his knowledge, routing money through an LLC my attorney managed. I wanted him to feel the dignity of standing on his own. I did not want him to know the floor beneath him was mine. That was my greatest mistake, not the secrecy, the silence. I never told him that the dignity he felt was a gift I was giving him, so he never learned to be grateful for it. Daphne's parents were named Chet and Faye. Chet was a broad man who spoke loudly and chewed with his mouth open. Faye was the kind of woman who smiled too much and meant none of it. They had driven up from Savannah for Christmas, which I had assumed was a holiday visit. When I saw the size of their luggage in the back of Colin's SUV, 4 large bags, 2 duffels, and a box of framed photographs, I understood it was not. Dinner was civil for about 40 minutes. Colin carved the ham. Faye complimented the curtains in a way that made it sound like she was deciding whether to keep them. Chet helped himself to the bourbon without asking. Then Daphne put a folder on the table beside my plate. "We need to talk about the house," she said. I looked at the folder. It was a residency agreement, downloaded from a legal template site, modified by someone who had watched too many courtroom dramas. It proposed to grant Chet and Faye the right to reside in my guest suite indefinitely, and transferred certain household financial decision-making to Colin and Daphne on the grounds that I was, quote, advancing in age and may benefit from support in managing a property of this scale. I closed the folder. "No," I said. That was when Daphne stood up. She grabbed Martha's estate documents, the originals I had taken out to reference a separate matter, sitting on the sideboard, walked to the fireplace, and dropped them in. They were irreplaceable originals. Our marriage certificate was in there. A letter Martha had written to Colin when he was born, sealed and never opened, meant for him on his 40th birthday. "Sign the new documents," Daphne said, "or this is the last family Christmas you will ever have." Colin looked at the flames, then at Daphne, then at his shoes. "She is right, Dad," he said quietly. "We need stability. They need somewhere to land. You have the space." I looked at my son. I thought about that letter, sealed for 40 years, now ash. I pushed my chair back, walked to the kitchen, and made the call. My brother Slade spent 22 years with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division before he retired to Knoxville and took up woodworking and consulting work he never fully explained to me. He was 3 years younger than me and approximately 300% more dangerous. When I told him 6 weeks earlier that something felt wrong about the way Chet and Faye had been hovering, the questions about square footage, the pointed interest in the detached garage, the way Faye once asked me which bank I used and then immediately changed the subject, Slade had gone quiet in the way he always did when he was already working. He had not been idle. When I walked back into the dining room and sat down, Chet was eating again. Faye had moved to the living room and was standing in front of the painting above the mantel, an original watercolor of the Blue Ridge Mountains that Martha had bought at a local show 30 years ago. She was tilting her head at it the way people do when they are calculating, not appreciating. "You should think about downsizing," Chet said to me without looking up from his plate. "Place like this is a lot to keep up when you are on your own." "I manage fine," I said. "We would help," Daphne said, sitting back down, folding her hands on the table. "That is the point. We would all be here, like a family. Colin could handle the bills, the maintenance calls, the property taxes. You would not have to worry about any of that." "What I would not have to worry about," I said, keeping my voice flat, "is what you are describing." She narrowed her eyes. "You are being selfish." I have heard that word before. Chet and Faye have nowhere to go right now. Their situation in Savannah. "I know what their situation in Savannah is," I said. That made her go still. The truth was, I only knew the outline at that point. But the look on her face told me Slade had been right to dig. I excused myself to use the restroom. I did not use the restroom. I went to my study, locked the door behind me, and sat down at my desk. The room looked like what people expected when they thought of a retired engineer. Drafting table, bookshelves full of technical manuals, a model of a composite fuselage section I had worked on back in 1987, under glass on the corner shelf. To everyone who had ever walked through that door, it was the room where an old man kept his old things. There was a safe behind the second bookshelf from the left. I had put it in 12 years ago and never mentioned it to anyone. Inside it, among other documents, were the licensing agreements for an aerospace composite materials bonding process I had co-developed in 1994 and held the controlling patent on since 2001 when I bought back full ownership. Every major commercial aircraft manufacturer in the world used derivatives of that process. The royalty income had been deposited into a trust in Charlotte every month for 23 years. Colin thought I lived on my pension and Social Security. He thought the house was my primary asset and that I struggled to keep it maintained on a fixed income. He had told me this directly, more than once, with a mixture of pity and impatience that I had trained myself not to take personally. He had no idea. I opened the laptop on my desk and pulled up the security system. I had installed interior cameras 3 years ago after a contractor had gone through my tool room. I had never told Colin or Daphne about them. I had never needed to. I pulled up the living room feed. Faye was no longer admiring the painting. She was on her phone, walking slowly around the perimeter of the room, speaking in a low voice. I turned up the audio on the recording. "At least 4 bedrooms upstairs, maybe 5. The garage is detached but heated. Chet, would you stop? I am looking. The living room furniture alone is worth something." A pause while she listened. "I know, but we need to be careful. If we rush it, he will dig in. Daphne says he is stubborn." Another pause. "Fine. I will check the study later." I switched to the kitchen camera. Colin was refilling his glass of bourbon, pacing between the island and the back door, running one hand through his hair. He looked like a man waiting for a verdict he already knew he deserved. I switched to the dining room. Chet was going through the sideboard. He had pulled open the lower drawer and was flipping through folders. He found my homeowner's insurance declaration and held it up to the light. Then he found an old investment statement from a brokerage account I had closed a decade ago. $22,000 in a moderate-risk index fund, and nodded to himself. He took out his phone and photographed it. He thought that was the whole picture. He put the folder back, closed the drawer, and returned to the table with the easy comfort of a man who had done this many times before. My phone buzzed. "Slade. Package ready. Say the word." I looked at the feeds one more time. Faye pricing my living room, Chet photographing my old statements, Colin drinking alone in my kitchen, letting all of it happen. I typed back, do it. What Slade had built over 6 weeks should have taken 6 months. He had found that Chet and Faye were subjects of a civil fraud complaint filed in Chatham County, Georgia. A complaint involving a home renovation business that had taken deposits from 11 families, completed work on none, and dissolved without warning. 3 of the families had placed liens, 2 had filed criminal referrals. A court date was scheduled for February. He had also found that Daphne had been making regular cash withdrawals from a joint account she shared with Colin, between $800 and $1,500 every 2 to 3 weeks for most of a year. The account was connected to a personal loan from a credit union in Hendersonville. The loan's cosigner was me. My signature on the application was not my signature. Colin had forged it, or Daphne had. Either way, the account existed, the loan existed, and I had been a guarantor on a debt I never agreed to carry. I sat at my desk and listened to movement out in the hall. They had started moving the bags in. I heard rollers on the hardwood, Chet and Faye conferring about which guest room was larger, and then the sound of a door opening down the hall. The guest suite, the room where Martha used to keep her sewing machine before we converted it, the quilts she had picked out herself still on the bed. This will work, Faye said, for now. For now. There was a knock on the study door. Dad, Colin, open up, we need to finish the conversation. I did not move. Dad, come on, just sign the papers, they need somewhere to be. It is Christmas. Colin, I said through the door. My voice was steady. I had managed project sites with 400 workers. I was not going to be undone by a knock on a door. I am going to ask you one question and I need you to think before you answer. A pause. Okay. Did you sign my name to a loan document at the credit union in Hendersonville? Silence. Colin. Dad, I can explain. That is a yes, I said. That is all I needed. I heard him step back, then Daphne's voice, low and urgent, telling him something I could not make out. Then silence, then, after several minutes, all 4 of them gathering in the hallway. I watched on the feed. Chet picked up the Fireplace poker from the entry hall. Not as a clear threat, not yet, just held it loosely, a man who liked the feeling of something solid in his hand. Daphne stood in front of the study door and looked at it for a long moment. He is not coming out on his own, she said quietly. She was right, but she had the wrong reason figured out. When the front door opened, not knocked, opened, because I had unlocked it remotely from my desk seconds before, which none of them noticed, the first person through was not a police officer. It was Slade. He was wearing his old field jacket and carrying a manila envelope with the specific expression he always wore when he had done work he was proud of. Behind him were 2 Buncombe County Sheriff's deputies and a woman from the DA's office who handled financial crimes. I opened the study door and walked into the hallway. Chet still had the Fireplace poker. He set it down very quickly. Mr. and Mrs. Callison, the deputy said, using Chet's full legal name that nobody in this house knew to look up. Both of them went rigid. We have a courtesy notice from the Chatham County Court regarding the civil case filed under your names. Your court date has been moved to January 3rd. Service of the updated filing is required in person. He handed Chet the envelope. I watched Chet's face read what was inside. The color drained from it the way water drains from a sink, fast, then slower, then gone. Faye looked over his shoulder and made a small, tight sound. Additionally, Slade said, I have been retained as a private investigator in a matter involving an unauthorized co-signature on a credit union loan. He looked at Colin without any particular malice, just stating a fact. The institution has been notified and will be in contact with you directly. Colin sat down on the stairs. He put his face in his hands. Daphne looked at me. For the first time since I had known her, she had nothing ready to say. They left by late afternoon. Chet and Faye loaded their bags back into the SUV and drove south with the knowledge that January 3rd was coming and their options were narrowing. The deputies followed them to the county line. I did not ask Slade how he had arranged that. Colin and Daphne sat across from me at the dining room table. Slade stood by the window. I brought the folder from the safe. I am going to tell you something now that I should have told you 10 years ago, I said to my son. I opened the folder to the first page, a royalty statement, most recent quarter from the licensing trust. I am not a man who lives on a pension. Colin looked at the number. He looked at it for a long time without speaking. The aerospace bonding patent, I said. Every commercial jet built in the past 2 decades uses a derivative of the process. The trust has been accumulating for 23 years. I kept it separate because I wanted you to build something of your own. I thought the best thing I could give you was the experience of standing on your own feet. I paused. Instead, what I gave you was a reason to resent me. You thought I was holding back when I was only holding off. And that is partly on me. Daphne had been watching me with the careful attention of someone recalculating under pressure. I could see her finding the new angle, the new leverage point. The trust, I said, turning to look at her directly, is no longer in Colin's name. She blinked. I changed the beneficiary designation 8 days ago, before any of this. I turned to the second page. The full balance has been transferred to an irrevocable charitable remainder trust. The primary beneficiary is the Western Carolina Community Foundation, with a designated allocation for housing assistance for families displaced by contractor fraud. I let that sit between us for a moment. Given the 11 families your parents left without a finished roof over their heads, I thought it was the appropriate use. Daphne stood up. You cannot do that. Colin is your son. Colin is my son, I agreed, which is why I am not handing him the consequences of your decisions. A separate educational account has been established for any children he may have someday, managed by an independent trustee that neither of you can access or influence. She stared at me. You are punishing him for what I did. I am protecting him from what you would do next. I closed the folder. You made an inquiry at an attorney's office in November about the process for filing guardianship over an elderly parent on grounds of cognitive decline. I know about it. I know about the withdrawals from the joint account. I know about the forged signature. I looked at Colin. I do not know how much of that you participated in willingly, and I am not certain I want to know tonight. That is for you to sort out between yourselves. Colin had not moved. He was looking at the tablecloth. I am not filing charges, I said. That is my choice. The loan will be dissolved. The guardianship inquiry went nowhere and will continue to go nowhere. But I need you both to leave my house tonight, and I need some time before I decide what comes after that. Slade stayed for dinner. I reheated the ham and made fresh coffee, and we sat at the kitchen table the way we had as boys. In the house, our mother had kept on a budget that required real ingenuity, where I had told him once when he was 17 that a man's worth had nothing to do with what he accumulated and everything to do with what he chose to do with it. Outside, the snow that had started around 3 o'clock was still falling. The backyard was white and still. She burned Martha's papers, Slade said after a while. She did. The letter. Yes. He was quiet. I had copies made 2 years ago, I said. When I first felt like something was wrong, I got up and opened the drawer beside the refrigerator and took out a sealed envelope. The attorney kept duplicates of everything. Slade looked at the envelope, then at me. You are a thorough man, Alistair, he said. I was an engineer, I said. We do not build in single points of failure. I set the envelope on the table. Colin's name was written on the front in Martha's handwriting, her careful, unhurried cursive, from the week after he was born, when she was still in the hospital and had asked me to bring a pen and an envelope because she said there was something she needed to put down before the feeling passed. He was out there somewhere tonight, in his car or back at their apartment or sitting in a parking lot trying to figure out what was left. He was 40 years old, and everything he thought he knew about his life had turned out to be partially wrong. That was not entirely his fault, and it was not entirely mine. But the letter was still his. Whatever else happened between us, that had not changed. I picked it up and set it somewhere I would know to find it when the time came. The snow kept falling. The house was quiet in a way that was not lonely, just empty, the way a room is empty after it has been cleaned, after all the noise has been cleared away, and what remains is only the shape of the thing, the bones of it, everything that was always yours. I drank my coffee. Slade told me a story about a case from 1999 that I had heard 3 times before and still thought was worth hearing again. We sat there until the pot was empty and the night had settled in for good. There is a kind of peace that has nothing to do with happiness. It does not feel like winning. It feels like the moment after a long piece of work is finished, when the structure is sound, when the load-bearing elements are verified, when you can step back from what you built and know that it will hold. That is what I felt that night, in my kitchen, with the snow coming down outside my window and the house quiet around me for the first time in years. The dignity you build with your own hands does not belong to anyone else. Not to those that come in demanding tribute, not to those who were supposed to love you but chose convenience instead. When someone tries to take it from you through manipulation, through fear, through the weaponization of family, the right response is not rage. It is architecture. It is the careful, patient construction of something they cannot reach. I built things that lasted, I still do. If this story reminded you that no one has the right to take what you have earned, not through entitlement, not through a forged signature, not through the burning of something irreplaceable, then hit like, leave a comment, and stay with me. There are more stories where this one came from.